Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into some source material today, looking at recent military activities, specifically off Iran's coast.
Right, and the main source focuses on this really massive Iranian drill. Happened recently, apparently covering a huge area.
Yeah, huge is right. 2 million square kilometers, the source says, off their southeastern coast.
And what's, immediately striking, as this analysis points out, is the context. This big Iranian exercise, it happened right after U.S., French, and British warships were doing their own drills.
Uh-huh. Something like 17 or 18 ships, the source mentioned.
Yeah, around that number.
Yeah.
And in the exact same region.
Right, and the material really highlights this common narrative, which you often hear from, say, mainstream media or politicians about both sets of drills.
That they were just routine exercises planned way ahead.
Exactly. Nothing unusual, sort of the nothing to see here approach, as the analysis puts it.
So the point of this deep dive, going by this source, is really to look past that surface story, to try and connect some dots.
Yeah. Because the perspective here is that, looking at any one of these things in a vacuum.
It might seem fine on its own, innocuous enough, I think is the phrase used.
But when you look at the collective, the grand scheme of all that's going on.
A different picture might emerge. That's the idea.
Absolutely. And the location itself is, well, it's critical. The source emphasizes this straight away. The Iranian drill was right there.
Right at the Strait of Hormuz. Super important.
It really is. This source notes the research showing, 20% of the world's oil?
Or 35% of the oil that travels by ship. Huge amount. It all flows right through that narrow strait.
Which naturally raises a big concern outlined in the analysis. If military tensions were to escalate.
A blockade there, it would cause big problems, the source says, especially for a global economy that's already,
Petering on the edge.
Yeah.
That's the phrase used.
But sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into some of the specific points the source makes to question that official narrative.
One key thing it brings up is that earlier incident with the U.S. sailors taken by Iran.
Ah, right. I remember that. How does the source describe it?
Well, it uses pretty strong language. Like, they were taken hostage. It mentions details like being put in cages.
Cages.
According to the source, yes. And forced to wear clothing that they didn't want to wear, weren't allowed out, filmed crying.
Wow. And forced to say things that they didn't want to say.
Yeah.
That's how the source characterizes it.
Exactly. Which contrasts sharply with the official explanation at the time.
Which was, as the source reminds us, their ships just lost power and strayed into Iranian waters.
Yeah, that was the story. Power loss. But this material is really, really skeptical about that.
How so?
Well, it argues these boats, special warfare combat craft, they just don't lose power to the entire boat, especially not two of them at the same time.
Good point. You'd think one could help the other, or at least call for help differently. Why would both just...
Right. The analysis questions that simultaneity. And it speculates, if it wasn't simple power loss, what else could it be?
Like what?
It floats the idea maybe Iran hacked the U.S. GPS. It mentions a past incident, reportedly, where Iran managed to hack and land a U.S. Predator drone.
Oh, I vaguely remember hearing something about that drone incident.
Yeah.
So the source suggests that capability might exist.
It suggests it's a possibility worth considering, yeah. But the main question the source feels the official story doesn't answer is...
Why no air support?
Exactly. Why didn't the sailors call for air support? The analysis argues planes could have easily protected them.
Okay, so if they didn't call or couldn't get it, why not? This is where the source brings in that other explanation, right?
Yes. And it's careful to state this came from Russian intelligence, and the source itself isn't 100% certain of its truth. It's just relaying it.
Understood. So what's this alternative explanation?
It suggests an Iranian ballistic missile landed really close, 1,800 yards off of one of our aircraft carriers in the region.
Whoa, that close.
According to this report, yeah. And the implication is that this incident kept everything on that carrier grounded. No planes could take off.
So no air support possible because of a missile threat near the carrier.
That's the scenario presented, and the source's opinion. It says this explanation, quote, certainly makes a lot more sense than the garbage we've been fed. Pretty strong words again, referring to the official power loss story.
Okay. So questioning the sailor incident, questioning the timing of the drills, how does the source connect this further?
It moves into the broader geopolitical context. It mentions prior warnings reportedly given to Iran, General Flynn putting Iran on notice about missiles.
And Trump following up on that too, yeah.
Right. But the perspective here is that Iran basically ignored it, remained unmoved by our threats.
How so?
The source points to Iran firing another missile right after being put on notice. It says this was like drawing a red line and kind of erased it.
Defiant, according to this view.
Hmm.
And then it brings Russia into the picture.
Yeah, the analysis asserts that Iran and Russia are strategic allies. It mentions geography, Iran acting as a buffer for Russia, and also points out Russia's own significant Muslim population, citing a figure of 20%.
Okay. Strategic allies. And this leads the source to make a pretty bold claim about the whole Russian narrative in the U.S., doesn't it?
It does. It strongly asserts that this incessant building up of a conflict with Russia just doesn't exist, that it's manufactured.
And it cites an expert.
Professor Stephen Cohen,
Yeah.
Described as a leading expert on U.S.-Russia history. The source says Cohen stated there's nothing to suggest major issues regarding Trump and Russia specifically.
And the source contrasts that view, the Russia threat being overblown, with its view of Iran.
Exactly. It sees Iran as the legitimate threat in this picture.
So the criticism then falls on the media.
Yes. The source claims the media is downplaying the real Iran threat while at the same time upplaying a problem with Russia. That's the argument.
Interesting juxtaposition. The analysis also touches on U.S. capabilities, right? But with some nuance.
Yeah, it questions U.S. military effectiveness, but not in a simple way. It points to the longest war against adversaries described as wearing sandals and no training.
Afghanistan, presumably.
Presumably, and mentions previous struggles like Vietnam. The implication is if we struggled there, how would we fare against a potentially more sophisticated Iran?
But it's careful not to blame the soldiers themselves.
Right. The source explicitly says it's not a knock on the military personnel.
Yeah.
It's questioning other factors, maybe leadership, resources, planning, something else.
And what's the source's take on why U.S. leadership might seem hesitant regarding Iran?
The opinion expressed is that U.S. upper leadership is scared to death of Iran.
Scared. Why?
It speculates a few reasons. One, uncertainty. We don't know that they don't have nukes. That ambiguity is concerning.
Okay, the nuclear question.
And also, Iran isn't, without resources. It has a boatload of money, according to the source, and powerful allies.
Like Russia, which it just mentioned.
Exactly. So money, potential nukes, allies. That combination, in the source's view, makes leadership nervous.
And this all loops back to the timing of those drills again.
Yes. The source finds it deeply suspicious. You have the U.S. and allies drilling near the Strait of Hormuz. Then they leave. Then Iran immediately starts a massive drill in the same spot.
In the source notes, none of our ships were around for Iran's drill.
Right. That timing and proximity right near that critical strait raises major flags for this analysis.
Okay, now this leads to what the source seems to think is the real hidden issue here, something often missed.
Yes. The petrodollar connection. The source claims Iran is, or was, flirting with depegging oil from the U.S. dollar.
Okay, let's just clarify depegging for everyone. That means selling oil in currencies other than the U.S. dollar.
Precisely. Like euros, yuan, rubles, whatever, not the dollar.
Why is that such a big deal, according to this source?
Because, as the analysis argues, the U.S. dollar's status as the world reserve currency, the main currency for global trade, is massively propped up by oil being traded in dollars, the petrodollar system.
And losing that status would be bad for the U.S. economy.
Extremely bad, according to this view. It provides huge advantages. So the source claims this depegging issue was actually something Michael Flynn was working on.
Flynn again. Interesting.
And it notes the timing. Talk of Iran depegging coincided with those U.S. naval drills off their coast.
Suggesting the drills might have been a message or related to that economic threat.
That's the strong implication from the source, and it brings up history to back this up.
Iraq.
Yes, the source makes the claim that the real reason the U.S. went into Iraq wasn't WMDs, but because Saddam Hussein had actually done it, he depegged oil from the U.S. dollar.
So the source sees Iraq as a precedent
Yeah.
that the U.S. will take drastic action to protect the petrodollar.
That's exactly the argument, and it doesn't mince words about how far the U.S. might go. It cites many experts who supposedly believe the U.S. would be willing to go to nuclear war over losing the petrodollar status.
Nuclear war over the
Right.
currency status. That sounds extreme.
It's a very dramatic claim. The source even makes this comparison, saying the economic fallout from losing the reserve currency status could be so catastrophic that
That being incinerated by a nuclear weapon might seem a lot more tolerable in comparison. That's
Yeah.
quite a statement.
It is. It's meant to convey the perceived scale of the economic devastation if the dollar loses its top spot.
And the source believes this is inevitable.
Yeah, it concludes this point by saying the death of the petrodollar and U.S. world reserve status is not a matter of if it will happen, it's well underway. That's the firm belief presented.
Wow. Okay. So connecting military drills, the sailor incident, Russia versus Iran threats, leadership fears, all potentially back to this economic linchpin, the petrodollar.
That's the picture the source paints,
Yeah.
which leads it to talk about information and how the public is being informed or not informed.
Right. It comes back to that idea that the public is being treated like idiots, not getting the real story from media or politicians.
Yeah. And the advice given in the source material is twofold. One, a call for leaders to stop lying to us, more transparency,
And two, for you, the listener,
to seek out other information, find sources that make you start thinking, not just regurgitating what's being told to you. Look deeper.
and it points to what's reportedly happening elsewhere as maybe
Yeah.
evidence that something bigger is going on.
Exactly. It highlights reports that other world leaders, say in Germany, the Czech Republic, are telling their citizens to prepare for civilization-ending events.
Civilization-ending events, that's heavy.
It is. And also that Russian civilians are apparently doing drills for incoming nukes.
So drills for nuclear attacks in Russia, serious warnings in parts of Europe.
And the source contrasts that starkly with what it sees as the message in the U.S., which it characterizes as everything's great.
And one more piece of anecdotal evidence the source mentions.
The reports about billion-dollar doom bunkers being built.
Right. Underground bunkers for the super rich, basically.
Yeah. And the source sees this as, well, maybe they know something the rest of us aren't being told. Why build those if everything's fine?
It all feeds that central idea from the source. None of these things are happening in a vacuum. They're connected.
Precisely. So just to recap the main threads this analysis weaves together.
We started with those Iranian drills right near the Strait of Hormuz, crucially timed after Allied drills.
And then the source challenging the official story about the U.S. sailors, offering that alternative explanation involving a missile near a carrier.
Then the whole discussion about Russia versus Iran, the source arguing the Russia threat is overhyped, Iran is the real deal, and they're allies.
Plus the concerns raised about U.S. capability in certain conflicts, and the suggestion that U.S. leadership is actually quite worried about Iran, maybe because of nukes, money, and allies.
And the huge, potentially underlying issue the source emphasizes, Iran possibly moving away from the U.S. dollar for oil sales.
The petrodollar threat. Framing it as something the U.S. has acted on before, potentially even willing to go to war over, and predicting its eventual decline.
So the core argument from this source is pretty clear. You're not getting the full picture from standard channels. These events are linked, maybe in ways that are deliberately downplayed or hidden.
And that key phrase again, none of this stuff is happening in a vacuum.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, based on all this material. Given these claims about major global events possibly being misrepresented, about leaders elsewhere reportedly urging preparation for serious crises.
How do you personally sift through the information you get from all the different sources bombarding you? And based on that, how do you decide, what level of awareness or even preparation feels right for you and your family? Something to think about.